All right. So it's been a couple of weeks, but like I said, almost a month since we were on our series dealing with Revelation. And as you know, we're kind of going through an in-depth, semi-in-depth, I guess, study on it. Since it's been so long, I thought, and since we're about to start a different section, it was a good time to recap the things that I think of as being important that we've already covered. So we're not going to recover everything, of course, because we did that over, 5 or 6 weeks. I don't know how long we talked, but I just want to reiterate a couple of things that I think of as being really important as we begin this lesson series. Well, not as we begin, but as we continue on in this series of lessons dealing with Revelation. And it's really important because I think everything we've talked about really builds into understanding the book as we go through it. So the first thing that we talked about, well, not the first thing that we talked about, but the first major thing that we talked about that I felt like is really important for us to remember is that Revelation has a lot of apocalyptic language in it. And we remember we talked about what that means. Apocalyptic language is used in prophecies to provide imagery related to a certain big event, a world-changing event. At least that's what it was used for in the Old Testament. We went through some examples of where there were prophecies related to the destruction of Jerusalem. And actually, how many times was Jerusalem destroyed? How many? 3? How many times were they prophesying about it? There's 2 different times that they're prophesying about it, right? You got the destruction of Jerusalem in, approximately 580, and then BC, and then you have in approximately AD 70, somewhere around there, the destruction, the final destruction of Jerusalem, so to speak, where the temple's destroyed and everything's done away with. So you got those 2 different events that are both being prophesied about at different points in the Old Testament books, in the different prophets. So it's kind of important to see. We use that for many different examples, for different things. But that's basically what the apocalyptic language means. And that the Bible never calls it apocalyptic language. That's what we call it. But it's basically use of symbols to discuss that kind of thing. And that can cause problems with interpretation, because what happens with people as they read through it is they think, well, this sounds like it's the end of times, right? So there's confusion as to what we're talking about when we read these prophecies. So what we did to talk about apocalyptic language, we went to a passage that's often misunderstood where Jesus talks about the destruction of Jerusalem. That's in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And there, Jesus said, he points out, it's the disciples point out Jerusalem, right? They go to him and they say, hey, look at all this. And Jesus says, there's going to come a time where there's not going to be one stone left on top of the other here. So Jesus tells them that, and then they are like, well, when's this going to happen, right? And they actually ask a couple of different questions. So we went through, some of the passages there only record the one question. Some of them record both questions, what will be the sign of your coming? So whenever Jesus answers that, he uses apocalyptic language, and he starts talking about the signs that are going to precede the destruction of Jerusalem. Now then the problem comes into play when does he stop? When does he answer the first question, and when does he answer the second question? We went through that. Some people think that he kind of goes back and forth. Some people think that he starts at one point. Some people think that he starts at another. As I told you, my opinion is that he only starts answering the second question at the point at which he says, but of that time and hour, nobody knows. That's whenever he starts answering, when is your second coming going to be? Up until that point, even the language where it sounds like he's talking about the end of the world is dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem. He's using that language to talk about these signs are going to precede the destruction. So we use that to kind of deal with that, to talk about the apocalyptic language and how it's interpreted. And the reason I think that's important is because a lot of people that I think misinterpret Revelation also link that into what Jesus says in those passages. All right, so that was the second kind of big, or first and second big things. The second thing that we went through, or next thing that I wanted to recover, I shouldn't say second because I don't know how many things we actually covered. So the next big thing that I wanted to cover is reiterate are some of the principles that I think we need to use for interpreting Revelation. And really, these aren't, for the most part, these aren't anything special. I mean, we should use these principles anytime that we're dealing with the Bible, interpreting the Bible for the most part. But there are a couple of big things. And the first one is we need to trust the author's own words, and specifically related to when are these prophecies supposed to happen? What does he say? In verse 4, right off the bat, these things are to happen soon. Soon, yeah, soon. So now you could say certainly after the destruction of Jerusalem it was going to happen. We've talked about that a little bit too, about when was this actually written, and was it written, now some people do try to put it before the destruction of Jerusalem, but most everybody I think accepts that it was written after the destruction of Jerusalem, and it's related to events happening somewhere a little bit later than that. But so he says it's to happen soon, and then not only does he do it at the beginning, but then at the end of the book, after relaying all these messages, it says it again. These things are going to happen soon. So it's emphasized that these things are coming soon. And we talked a little bit about what soon is. And it's critical that we understand that, because there again, depending on what you think or when you think these things are going to happen, does a lot for how you interpret these visions as you go through it. Because if you think, we talked about the different interpretations. Some people think that it's still to come, that it hasn't happened yet. We talked about premillennialism. We talked about those who view it as kind of historical, kind of continuing through history. And I told you my opinion is that it's dealing with the Roman persecution that was going to be, that the Christians had undergone and were going to undergo at this point in time. So when the prophecies were to be fulfilled is extremely important, but we have to trust the author's words, his own words, to kind of figure that out. And he says very specifically, this is going to happen very soon. We also covered that the Bible teaches that people are responsible for their own conduct and that they have the free will to act. So, when I emphasized back when we talked about Job, how free will that's why God created this world, was to give us the opportunity to make a choice. God couldn't be too close to us. He couldn't be too far away from us. He had to be in the right place. The world had to be made in the right way to give us the choice. Are we going to serve God or aren't we? So we have free will. And any interpretation of Revelation that indicates that people do not have a free will is false. And I think, that kind of points to some doctrines that are taught out there about how people are predestined, or only a certain group is going to be saved, like that we don't have a choice. So it kind of relates to that. Also, any theory that places a meaning on figurative language that contradicts plain, literal language in the Bible, in the scriptures, should be rejected. So in other words, when you get into looking at these passages that, well, what does it mean? And nobody really knows exactly. We kind of know, but nobody knows exactly. We can't place that above clear statements that it's like, well, there's no doubt what that says. When you do that, you got your own agenda, is what I would say there. So, here again, go back to the passages we read in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Some people try to indicate that the figurative language Jesus says indicate that there are going to be signs to predict when he's going to return for his second coming. But that clearly contradicts what he says, clearly what he states specifically. Nobody knows when that time's going to come. And then we talked about how in Matthew chapter 25 is all about that. Nobody knows. Be ready. Be watchful. Be waiting for that to happen. It'll be like a thief in the night.
It's a warning.
Right. So we have to put plain text above the visions and things like that may not be quite as clear. And then, of course, as with all Scripture, the context has to be considered. We talked about who was the book written to, what's the time period, what's going on. The meaning of the visions provided as prophecies of John should be interpreted with, asking these questions. Who was it written to? What were the circumstances? What would the symbols and imagery have meant to them? So we need to keep that in mind. And of course, that's true, like I said, that's true across, maybe not that last question, but the context has to be considered as we read the Bible across all Scriptures. Okay, finally, the thing that we talked about was about Roman history and what was going on with Roman politics and all that, and how that impacted what was going on with the church at that point. Okay, so then, Dave, I guess we're ready to go to the visions PDF that I had up there. Yep, it's the 4 great visions of Revelation. All right, well, so we talked, as we were ending the last class that I did several weeks ago, we talked about, we were going to go through kind of a real general overview of Revelation, what's in the book by chapter. And with that, we put up this one PDF, which is not up there yet. All right, I surprised Dave with that one, I guess. But there's 4 kind of breakdowns of Revelation where it talks about where John is when he's looking at this. One, the first chapter, he says, where is he? He's on the Isle of Patmos. So that's the first, and that goes through chapter 3. That's where he receives I guess I'll start my outline there. Okay, so he receives, so in chapter 1, John, and before I say that, let me give you a background. This brief synopsis of Revelation kind of comes from Jim McGuigan's book. And as I said, it's going to come from the viewpoint that this is dealing with Rome, as far as the topics that we're dealing with. So as we go through and kind of talk about these chapters in very high level, that's where we're going from. So in chapter 1, John sets the stage and provides an introduction to what is going to be written in the book. It's a vision from Jesus about the church's future, and John sees a vision that represents Jesus in the midst of the churches. And we'll go, like I said, we're not going to go into detail on that right now. We'll go look at that later. Chapters 2 and 3, these are the letters from Jesus that probably most of you are familiar with, the letters from Jesus to the 7 churches that are being addressed. He praises them for the good things they are doing and tells them the things that they need to change, right? In each case, there's some type of call to repentance, or, in the case of a couple of them, to remain faithful. And then an encouragement to hear what is being said. That emphasizes that encouragement to let him who has an ear hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So an emphasis on those things. Chapters 4 and 5, so here those chapters is the second breakdown here, and in that one, John says he's taken to heaven. Says, and after these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard, like the sound of a trumpet speaking to me, said, come up here, and I will show you the things that must take place. Take place after these things. So in the second stage, so to speak, or second part, we're looking at a scene in heaven. And in chapters 4 and 5, these start the apocalyptical section of the book. And they are meant to show comfort for the people that are about to undergo persecution for several years. Now, sometimes during that period of time, it would be more severe. Sometimes it would be less. But these are meant to show that God, a vision of God on the throne with the elders and creatures and angels worshiping him. How might that be comforting to those who are going to receive this? How would that, a vision of God on the throne with elders and these people worshiping him, how would that be comforting? Say that again. All right, so you see a vision here in chapters 4 and 5. There's a vision of God on a throne surrounded by these elders. And so my question was, how would that be comforting to those who are going to be reading this?
Anytime you are looking at representative of God and Jesus and the Word, everything, it has got to be encouraging, period. Especially with the elders there and the significance of that.
So it's comforting. It's comforting.
Yeah. No.
What did you want?
It was the one that's called The Four Great Visions of Revelation.
Right.
That one was the interpretations. Four visions right there. Yeah, that one. If it comes up. There it is. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. All right, so to me, it's comforting because you see, it's like this is the ultimate, right? This is where it's going to end up. No matter what, we see God's in control, and that no matter what's happening, because I mean, part of chapter 5, which once again, I'm not trying to get into the detail on this right now, but part of chapter 5 is about these 7 seals, and nobody can break them, right? Nobody can open them up. Who's worthy to do so? Well, who is worthy? God, Jesus. That's who's worthy. So that's comforting to know that everything's in God's control. And to see this scene, I mean, once again, here this is why just the imagery is cool, because it kind of gives you that sense, right? I don't even know how to explain it, and that's the whole point. I can't even explain it, but it just gives you a sense that God's in control and that these things are going to be okay. Even though you're about to go through all this stuff, it's going to be okay. All right, and then chapter 6, the seals are opened by Jesus, and the seals keep the message hidden, and a certain amount of the message is revealed each time a seal is torn off. So the sealed book is the immediate will of God in reference to his church and the trials that it's about to undergo. The image is revealed by the opening of the seals. Now, we just got through 4 and 5, where it's really comforting. Chapter 6, not so much. They're pretty vivid and terrifying, what's being described in this vision. But once again, you got to keep in mind, all of this is vision. So the thing we have to ask as we're going through the book is, so there's the symbol, there's what's going on, what does it mean? Yeah.
It's also important to note that while visions may be terrifying, the point of it was it's in God's hand, literally, and he's on the throne exercising his power. So he already knows.
Right. He already knows this is coming. Yeah.
He knows, and he's dealing with it.
Yep.
And so it's still a message of comfort.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In fact, if you look at it, if you can really break it down to, here comes the bad, but the church is going to overcome because God's already seen it. Like that's kind of replicated throughout as we go through this. So, in fact, after chapter 6, chapter 7, God provides comfort for his people. He assures all the saints that no matter what happens to them here on earth, no matter how bad, everything will go well for them. And that's where you get into the 144,000, which once again we'll deal with later. But we're sealed. God's people can have confidence that everything's going to be okay. And we talked about that. Is that here on earth? Not necessarily as far as we look at it, right? Because there are people getting killed here. I mean, there's people dying. So it's not like he's not promising, oh, you stay faithful to me and you're going to have a great life. The promise is that if we stay faithful, we're going to be with him, that we're going to win the ultimate victory.
Now that is faithful unto death.
Right, unto death. Well, yeah, and that's emphasized there in it as well. Be faithful unto death. Chapters 8 and 9, then, we get the blowing of the trumpets. And these go under the seventh seal. So you have the seventh seal open, and then you have 7 trumpets. Trumpets in the Old Testament were to sound the alarm and to get people's attention. So we got, hey, listen up here, right? These trumpets are warnings for the ungodly and the oppressors of God's people. And we are told that they're going to refuse to repent. So judgment's coming, right? Chapters 10 and 12, they go into conflict and comfort. Chapter 10 assures the saints of the ultimate judgment on the oppressor. Chapter 11 discusses that sometimes the conflict will appear to be going in the enemy's favor, but Jesus has the ultimate victory. And chapter 12 makes it clear that the devil is going to lose 3 times over. I forget exactly what those 3 times are off the top of my head, but he loses all the way through. And comfort is given. The comfort given is important because we're about to go into another place where we got problems. Chapter 13, the enemies of the church are clearly seen in this vision. They are the dragon, which is the devil. And we'll cover this some more in a little bit. The sea beast, which is Rome as its civil power, and the earth beast, Rome as a religious movement. Because these are so horrific, the saints are warned and assured of the human and evil nature of the beast. In other words, they can't overcome God. God's supreme, God rules. These are people. They can't beat God. They can't defeat God. Chapters 14 and 15, these chapters, once again, give some reassurance, needed reassurance, after this vision of the beasts and the dragon. And in spite of the enemy, the 144,000 that we briefly mentioned, are singing a new song and are victorious. Angels make announcements and are told to perform actions that show judgment has come and that Babylon, what's Babylon? Rome, and those that worship the beast, Rome, are doomed. These chapters go back to scenes in heaven and comfort for the people that are going to undergo these persecutions. Chapter 16, the 7th trumpet is sounded, and that brings about the pouring of the 7 bowls of God's wrath. The chapter implies that all the wrath of God is outpoured, and there is complete victory of the saints over their enemy. So the victory, at least what's being referenced here, is complete victory. And the details over the victory are then given later on in chapters 17 through 19. The Battle of Armageddon, we get a glimpse of in 16, but it's described in chapter 19. So you kind of get into this happens and then more detail later on. And Babylon's declared destroyed in chapter 16, but we get details in 17 and 18. So this is saying this is the ultimate victory, but then there's kind of subcontext after that, more detail that comes after that. So then in chapter 17, there's the third section This is in the wilderness. He says that, I'm not going to read that because it's not easily seen just in those first few verses, but 17 through 21, the place is in the wilderness, and these chapters discuss the fall of the city that ruled the world in John's day. What city was that? Rome. Rome. And chapter 17 tells how and why it falls, and 18 gives a description of the fall. Then 19 tells of the joy of the saints at the fall of the enemy. This is described as a wedding feast. And the symbols show that the fall was at the hand of Jesus and a result of his work. So that God's directly responsible for what's going to happen here. Chapter 20 describes the utter defeat of Satan in the matter of using Rome against the church. So Rome's going to be locked up. Like, it's not going to be able to be used in the way that it had been to go against the church. It speaks of total and complete victory of the saints, using the resurrection of martyred saints as a visual of the victory. So that's once again a part of the vision. A resurrection to the thrones on which they reigned 1,000 years gives us assurance concerning the future. Satan is loosed and obtains a huge army, but is utterly defeated. It then tells of the basic difference between the servants of God and the servants of Rome. One group rises on thrones, while the other rises to be thrown into a lake of fire. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of those passages. Chapters 21 and 22, these chapters are a glorious description of the victorious New Jerusalem, the bride of the Lamb, or Jesus. And her glorious vindication is described much as the temple is described in Ezekiel 47. The river flows from her, and the trees of life which grow on either side of the river. And the book closes with a solemn warning that the message is to be taken seriously and not to be messed with, basically, is the way I interpret it. Unfortunately, I don't think people listen to that, right? We have all kinds of messing with the message, but there's a very stern warning on that. All right. That was very quick, very high level. We didn't get into anything real specific there. Anybody have any questions or comments on that before we start in on the symbols? All right, great. This is a lot of fun. The symbols are interesting. Before you put any slide up there on this one, let me ask a question. Why was Revelation written using images to relay its message? What do you think?
Make people be aware of what's coming.
Make people be aware?
I think that many years ago that the symbols meant more than what we realize today.
It can. Let me ask another question on top of that. Was it written in secret code so that the church's enemies wouldn't know what was being said? That's been I've heard that as a theory to why it was written that way. Do you think that's why it was written that way?
I doubt it.
Yeah, I don't really think so. So if not, why was it? That's the question. Why was it written that way?
If I may postulate, the symbols are to make it more dynamic. Today we've got, Netflix and all these other wonderful things. We can throw images out, and most of which blows right past us. But it makes it much more exciting, and we can get the message. And I see that in a literary prose, if you will, in ancient times, where they tend to accentuate things and try to draw images out to get your mind thinking. It's not to lay a specific, any one specific I'm going to use the wrong word here, but like a foundation so everybody sees the same thing. It's rather to get everybody to be thinking in that way.
Right. Something you said there made me just think of how else should it have been written or could it have been written? As it would be, yeah, it could have been laid out in a way, but then I still don't think we would get the whole point. In fact, I doubt we would get the whole point of it if it had been laid out that way. And, well, let me just go into some of the reasons I think, there's several possible reasons that God would have chose to reveal it this way. One, it could be meant to help the readers, hearers visualize and picture the message being conveyed. Two, it's meant to stir up strong feelings and make an impression on us. Three, it's dealing with things that are beyond our ability to fully grasp. It deals with spiritual warfare and eternity and big matters. So that helps us in trying to grapple with some of that. And fourth, even though the prophecies were for events to happen in the not too distant future, to me at least, having written it this way and provided it this way allows the message to apply to all Christians from that time on. We may not be going through the same thing, and in fact, I think Jimmy often emphasizes, do we think we're being persecuted in America? Not really when you talk about what is true persecution. What are they going through in China or in some of the countries in Africa and in the Middle East? Here we haven't really seen what would be called true persecution. But nevertheless, this writing it this way and providing it this way allows it to apply to anybody undergoing persecution for their Christian faith. I'd ask the question, how else could it have been, as I did a little bit ago, how else could it have been communicated to us? What's the other way? How could it be done in a way that would apply to God's people all the way through until Christ comes back? I think God knows what he's doing, right? He did it in that way. Yeah, so I think that's the case. Dave, go ahead and put that slide up. I don't know if I've already covered it all or not, but the one about symbols. Nope, not interpretations. Where's the symbols one? It would have been in that, maybe, did you get that last email that I sent before I went on vacation back a month ago? It would have been attached to that one. All right, well, we'll probably hit it. We'll put it up there next week whenever we get back to it. But anyway, let me see. Let me make sure I've covered it here. If I can find it. Oh, I've lost it in my papers as well, so I guess it's missing in action. All right, anyway, there was a slide that just talked about why use symbols and what that imagery means. We'll hit it next week whenever we get there. All right, so we have about 5 minutes. I guess we can start in on the first group of symbols that I wanted to talk about. We're going to start what I consider to be easier, I guess. Although, as I discuss this, you'll see that's not really easy. But we'll start with colors. And colors can be used in the Bible to represent a trait or a train of thought. We do this to some degree today as well. For instance, if I say blue and pink, what do you think of?
Babies.
What's that? Babies, right, yeah. Is a baby on the way going to be a boy or a girl, right? That's what you think of. What about if I say green? You may think of springtime, or new life, possibly. So we relate colors to things. And I looked at a few articles that dealt with the use of colors in the Bible. And those articles, I mean, it doesn't look like anybody is, I would consider to be an expert on it. Because why not? Well, the Bible doesn't tell you exactly, right? The Bible doesn't say this color means this or that or whatnot. So nobody really knows exactly the way, but as you're reading, colors do convey a message to us. So, you know, coming up with an exact listing of what the colors represent in the Bible is difficult, and I don't think anybody can claim to do it. And I certainly don't. But I wanted to kind of draw attention to it because it does matter and make a difference as we're reading through. And I think the meanings of colors changes a little bit depending on what situation it's being used in as a symbol. So do we have the color slide up there? Or is that the one of the ones that I sent in that last batch too that you don't have? Okay. All right, so we don't have the slide yet, but we only have a couple minutes anyway. Actually, we only have a couple minutes. So maybe it's better just to wait since we don't have the slide up there anyway. We'll get started on that. But anyway, we'll pick up there next week with colors, talking about what kind of things that brings to our mind as we look at it and what they mean. And then we'll get into some of the other symbols too. So thanks everybody for your comments, and we'll be back for worship in 16 minutes or so, and then pick up next week.